Right, next up, one of our partners in our open innovation, fintech open innovation cluster in Cape Town is Thomson Reuters, and they run their Africa Innovation Lab from our premises, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Joyce Shen, who's Global Director, Emerging Technology Partnerships and Investments at Thomson Reuters.
Thanks so much, Ian. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm not from the Cape Town Thomson Reuters lab, but I'm very honored to be here and I have the opportunity to speak to you about what we have done in blockchain and the space. So how many people know Thomson Reuters? It's pretty good. So I usually start with Thomson Reuters is the parent company Reuters News, but we actually do a lot more. And I think going through the talks here, I will go through why we started to look at blockchain as emerging technology. And specifically in my role, I wear two hats. One is to help our company to understand from a CTO organization perspective, what are the emerging technologies that will be transformative to our company and to our clients. And then second, I actually run the Emerging Technology Venture Fund. So we'll talk a little bit about our investments in the blockchain space as well. So I'm not going to go through the technology itself. I'm making the assumption that all of you actually agree that blockchain could be a very powerful technology for a lot of industries. So I want to focus on the landscape itself. As someone who grew up in the technology industry, both on the mergers acquisition side, on the product development, and business side, it's very important to look at the maturity of the landscape itself and the players in there, and to inform us, at least inform our company and myself, where this is going. So just a little bit about what we've done. So Thomson Reuters is a practitioner in blockchain since end of 2014. We started to look at this technology about 2 years ago to really try to understand what is so different about this technology and how can we get involved and learn. And we kind of took the approach as a corporate in a few ways. One is we joined Hyperledger, we joined R3 in 2016 to really understand where are the formation of these protocols and how the technologists are thinking about building these fabrics where the applications will build on top of it. We made investments. So from the Emerging Technology Fund, we made 3 investments. Out of all the investments focused on blockchain. One is Hydro, which is trade finance. They're building a receivable marketplace on the blockchain, connecting the corporate treasuries, the correspondent banks, and other stakeholders in the supply chain ecosystem. The second company is Funderbeam, and some of you from Europe will know Funderbeam. They're actually in production today. It's an example of where we talked a lot about tokenization of assets and transfer value across different stakeholders. So Funderbeam is an end-to-end trading platform for primary, secondary shares of private companies. Right? So if you're in Europe, you can go onto Funderbeam, start a syndicate, start a special purpose vehicle, and start trading private shares. All of that is recorded on blockchain, and it's actually quite powerful to see a use case in practice. And if you think about the future of stock exchange, where more and more companies are not going public and are staying private, and you want to have liquidity in that private market, how can you use a technology like blockchain as a back end to facilitate the future version of a stock exchange for private companies? And they're doing that, and they signed agreements with one of the Eastern European stock exchange as their private market for their public market. Exoni is an example of providing blockchain for capital markets, and they're working with large banks in building out different kinds of applications, for example, over-the-counter derivatives, equity swaps, on permissioned private blockchain for capital markets, where privacy, confidentiality, and other considerations are being built out as we speak. And then we also build our own things, right? So we have internal development team that are well-versed on all the different protocols, and we built Block 1, which is based on Ethereum. Block 1 is identity authentication gateway for any applications that you will build on Ethereum. So you can federate identity from your master identity libraries without building it once more for the applications that you want to make sure that there is a secure identity gateway. And then we also publish a book for the legal professions around blockchain. So why we're doing these? So Thomson Reuters actually has multiple business units. It's an $11 billion business, half of which is financial risk. We serve all the banks and regulators included, and we sell data and technology to that ecosystem. We have a legal business where we sell content technology to all the law firms around the world, and then we also have a government business where, again, we help the law enforcement and government entities around the world to make sure that they protect their countries. And then a tax and accounting business where Accenture, for example, will be a client where they will buy our proprietary research and technology to aid their decision making for their end clients. So TR, right, is a big data and technology company serving industries, I think you know where I'm going with this, that actually have a lot of use cases for blockchain. These are organizations in complex regulated industries that work with multiple stakeholders on a daily basis. Real-time, non-real-time, structured, unstructured data are transmitted every day through these networks for these individuals in these industries to make a decision. So this is why we start to look at this blockchain. And what do they want at the end of the day, every day? They want to serve their customers in analytics-driven, open, trusted approaches. They want to bring their employees to higher value work and reduce intermediaries and redundant work. And they want to proactively respond to market trends so they're ahead of their curve. And ultimately, every day, all day, these are the values you're looking for. And you can take out the jargons, you can take out all the complexities in all these industries, and this is what they want to do. So if we apply this technology to and translate what these value drivers to the kinds of capabilities they're looking for, right? They're looking for data provenance, integrity, and security. They're looking for data privacy for what they're doing. They're looking for workflow collaboration sharing across their internal environment and external environments. And they want system integration, application security, and they want monitoring and reporting for all the regulatory compliance requirements that they have today. And they want scalability, given these are multinational companies working, again, with very high volume of data and transactions. So I'm not going to go through technology. This is a very crude way of explaining blockchain, but it's a blockchain, right? And in today's world, and when I explain to our CEO and our clients, we're at the point where blockchain has solved data provenance, integrity, and security. And one gentleman just asked about data security. If you go to some of the POCs today, I have seen, right, implementation of how privacy is being considered by building out specific kind of architecture to allow peer-to-peer parties within a multi-party network to only see their transaction, and then you have a much broader environment within the same permissioned network to be able to see more. So I would say that today with where the state of blockchain, we have solved these two requirements. Distributed network, peer-to-peer distributed network, which is another attribute of blockchain here. They solve the workflow collaboration and automation, right? In essence, the ideal world is that with the distributed ledger, you can orchestrate workflow. And with the orchestration of the workflow, you can transmit data to multiple parties. And we see that in practice. And so that requirement, I would say that we tick the box. It may not be perfect, and different protocols, different companies may have different way of actually implementing it, but at the end of the day, if you kind of unpack this technology to its core, this has been satisfied. So what has not been satisfied but been worked with? And so as a lot of the people here have said, right, you need integration with everything else. There are CRM systems, there are ERP systems, there are other security systems. For Thomson Reuters, we deliver data. So we provide data feeds all day, every day to all clients. there needs to be adapters integration built between the external system of the chain to the chain in this peer-to-peer distributed network. And this work is happening, but it's not at the scale where we can implement it right across the board. I mean, for Thomson Reuters, we have built the ability to essentially provide our data feed into an equity swap application, right? We have demonstrated with 5 banks. We can show we can do that real time based on the events that's triggered by the smart contracts in the equity swaps application. But it's not generalized enough today where you can say that, just like Oracle is integrated with everything else, or IBM's DB2 is integrated with other things upstream. It's not happening today yet with the generalization and the integration of the systems, but it's coming. So yes, these are some of the gaps in the technology for the implementation, but am I confident this will happen if we just look at the evolution of technology for all the things that happened before blockchain, it will happen fairly quickly. So one of the things I like to do is to talk about the stack. And the stack is who are the players and where do they play. It's not black and white, but it gives an idea of where all these vendors are positioning themselves and where they're moving. And for us, I start to look at these companies both as a practitioner, right, in building out new product, as an investor. This is a very crowded market, right? You probably look at all these companies, you get confused. I was confused. I probably talked to more than 200 blockchain companies, and I still have 2 or 3 coming every day, all day about what they do. They tell me about the new protocols they're building. They're talking about the use cases. And fundamentally, if you look at starting in 2015, we start to have Bitcoin, the public blockchain. You have Ripple, the payment, and then followed by Ethereum, right? This is what I call kind of the fabric platform. These are the kind of the logics that are orchestrating, everything in this technology. And then you have others that are coming out, right? You had Hyperledger that are more focused on enterprise. Then you have Corda and Lightning, another payment protocol. You start to have Cardano this year, and then IOTA, which is focused on Internet of Things. These are, all protocol. And we just heard another protocol today from one of the other companies. And then you have the large tech companies, right, on the bottom of the stack. These are the IBM's world, the Microsoft of the world, Amazon of the world. And this is my view, not Thomson Reuters' view, but their fundamental strategy all day is that they want you to build your application on top of their cloud infrastructure, right? And so to me, that is a fundamental motivation for a lot of these companies becoming the kind of integrated with the protocols, but ultimately providing their cloud infrastructure as the underlying piece for everything that go on top of it. So we start to see that, right? Microsoft and all these companies coming up, providing solutions, blockchain as a service, protocol as a service. You have sandboxes where you can build things within Azure, within the other environments. And then it gets more interesting. And you have what I call the software and service providers that are essentially trying to take the protocol layer and extrapolate on top of it, right? And help financial services and other industries to essentially make the protocols useful. And these are the companies like Digital Asset Holdings, Sony, and the list goes on, where they have consulting, they have implementation, they implement the technology within the requirements of the clients. And in most times, these large implementations are private permissioned environment. And then you have some of the more kind of pure applications that sit on top of it, right? Trade finance, secondary market trading, things specifically focused on energy, IoT, and analytics of the trading platform and so forth. I would say that the application, that kind of the service and the software layer are somewhat blurred, and you can make the argument that some of these companies are not decided where they want to be. And to me, that's a big problem if you don't know where you're in the stack. And the last piece is data. You have, of course, Thomson Reuters. You also have other companies that are trying to build this integration so that you can feed off the chain data into the environment so that you actually make the application that are in the blockchain environment useful. This is what I call version 1.0. I'm actually working on another version where you can argue that you can split the application layer furthermore, right, into digital identity, IoT, all the other kind of tranches within the application layer. And then you have kind of the vertical adjacencies where you start to go around kind of the security management, key management, and so forth. So as one of the ways to think about the landscape, and we look at kind of the technology landscape in general, you have so many companies in the application and the distributed ledger kind of service and software layer that there will be losers and winners, of course. There will be lots of startups that will start to look for funding again this year and next year as their runway go out. There will be a fairly soon inflection point of which one or two companies in the implementation phase where they will be picked, and then there will be consolidation. So what are the use cases kind of split into the verticals? To me, you start from kind of the macro and to kind of the more specific. And I know we talked a lot about use cases today, but this is the way I think about where the boxes are ticked, right? You digitize information assets. I think that's a classic kind of macro application of blockchain. And all industries, this is applicable, and specific tax and accounting as well. Think about the auditing process, and then for the government. And then the rights management is almost like a sub-case of digitized information assets, where in media you have companies like Steemit, right, that are trying to monetize your kind of user-generated data by giving you Steam. And in government, you have lots of government entities now looking at land registry as a use case. And then digital identity. So somebody yesterday said digital identity doesn't matter. Fundamentally disagree with that. It is a means to an end. But digital identity is a huge problem for a lot of countries. It's a huge problem for a lot of corporations where a lot of their customers are generating data all over. Omnichannel all over the country. And whether you're the government or the industry, you need to have authoritative view of how to describe a person or organization, how they're related in a graph kind of database. And blockchain could be very good for that. And then new financial assets, right? So we talk about Bitcoin, we talk about other cryptocurrency. The Winklevi, in New York right now, they're waiting for SEC to decide whether there will be a Bitcoin kind of ETF, and that would be huge if it's approved. And then trade finance, right? That's not, a lot of people talk about that for corporate markets, but insurance is one that's really untapped. That's an industry I think is behind in this wave. And then transactional processing and settlement, that's what everybody is talking about. And then KML, KYC and AML, that touches every vertical of the financial services as well as the government. And the last piece is regulatory insights. We talk about the golden source of data on these blockchain, these ledgers. And we haven't really talked about when you have a world that's becoming more and more blockchain enabled, you will have all these single source of truth on these blockchain and on these ledgers. How do you actually extract the data into actionable insights? And who's responsible for doing that? So in other words, who's going to be the Google of these ledger information that are critical for a lot of different stakeholders for both monitoring and transactional purposes. So what are the mature use cases to me? Those are in the green, and then which means that there are lots that even people are talking about it. You see tons of companies in digital identity. I mean, I see tons of companies in digital identity. I think they're very fairly nascent. I see a lot of companies in trade finance. I still think they're very nascent in terms of implementation. And the interesting ones certainly are digitized information related to government. I think KYC AML is a classic use case here that's not been tapped except for some pockets. specifically on the monitoring of activity on the public blockchain. But how do you extend that to beyond that and use some of the algorithms that you build on the public blockchain for the monitoring and extend that sophistication to AML and KYC off the chain. And then I talk about regulatory insights. So to me, a lot of the implementation questions are not actually about the blockchain technology itself, but actually about everything else, right? If we think about digitized information and assets on blockchain, the question is who's going to set the standard for those digitization? And where are the source of this data and the provenance of data that will go into this engine, right? And that will hash it on the chain. It's trash in, trash out. So if we're going to create a digitized world, right, with blockchain as a backbone, who are the right authorities in the governance model to make sure that whatever we're digitizing, what the inputs that are put in are the right inputs? And at what point in time do you actually use zero knowledge proofs to make sure that privacy and confidentiality are there? For digital identity, I think we talk about that, but it's not one thing, right? You have digital identity companies that focus on the sovereignty of identity for individuals based on some of the European laws that are coming out, which is very different from digitizing information about people, about organization, and federate that information into other applications so that they have more effective authentication and verification. Those are very different use cases within digital identity. Both could require blockchain, and I think we, a lot of times, mix those together. There are lots of existing systems out there with digital identity. How do we integrate that? I think we haven't really talked about that if we want to use blockchain to kind of elevate what we're doing in this space. And KYC AML. So one of the big problems with KYC is that people know how to do KYC. It's that how do you do it in a way that is better service and better value for end customer, right? It is not a sexy job. And I'm not sure if blockchain could solve that, quite honestly. And I talked about AML on the public blockchain. You see a lot of companies are trying to do that. So how do you take that sophistication on understanding identity, on anonymous identity on the public blockchain and solve that for identity resolution in other situations? And regulatory insights. There will be lots of permission blockchain, and even though the regulators, right, we talk about regulators being active in the space, they're learning, and they're seeing how these are being implemented, but no one has really come out and said, well, this is the requirement that I want as part of a node on this permissioned ledger, and this is what I want to see, and this is the way I want to see it. Until that happens, these permissioned distributed ledgers will not be implemented at scale in financial services. They're there to learn, but the regulators have not opined on their own requirements. I think that is a huge gap. And the other huge gap is that, again, there will be tons and tons of data, transactional data, hash on these ledgers. And today, in our world, these data are being distributed to different companies that would then aggregate and create insights for transactional monitoring and other use cases, and then feed back out to the industry for regulatory and compliance reasons. And if you are building a permission blockchain with multiple stakeholders in that environment, you have data residing on that blockchain, and yet no one really has talked about how do you extract that so that you can still get the right insights, and who is responsible for doing that and in what way, and who is going to give the requirements. I think those are conversations that has not happened in depth in a lot of the implementations that I've seen at proof of concept or past phase one of the proof of concepts. So what are the things that interest me? And I think as someone who has looked at this space for more than 2 years, I think digital transformation of government is a very interesting space, a lot of big opportunities, it's a very hard one. And you see some of the more forward-thinking governments, including some in Africa, in China, and others are kind of thinking about this. But we had e-government 10 years ago around the world, and now, starting with land registry, digital identity, I mean, you can just list the use case in government where blockchain could be, or elements of the technology could be applied to government where you can do more effective monitoring, you can provide better service to your citizens, and you can prevent corruption. Digital identity, somebody talked about ID 2020. I think someone talked about use case here where they're using blockchain to create identity for children in Africa. I think that is very exciting, right? There are billions of people in the world don't have identity, which means that if they don't have identity, they don't have service provided to them because people don't know they exist. And how do you use blockchain potentially as a way to create cost-effective identity minting process for those who don't have identity around the world. And Internet of Things, so machine-to-machine transmitting of data, and then be able to feed that back up into the stack for actionable insights, for companies like GE and others. I think that's quite interesting. I'm not sure there are any breakthrough applications in KYC AML. I think some of the use cases that we've talked about here and before is really already kind of talking about some of the key things for KYC AML, but I'd love to hear if you think there are more kind of breakthrough opportunities. And then for regulatory insights, I think there's huge opportunity there that we haven't talked about. So lastly, what are my wish lists? I would love to have in my investment accounts, right, in Fidelity, others, to be able to trade cryptocurrency. And this is not possible today. And if we really want kind of cryptocurrency as an asset class and benefit more people, we need to be able to do that. And so I would love to see that. I would love to see more national identity systems built on blockchain. So those are the two things. I think they will probably come in the next few years. So that's all I have. Any questions?
Thank you very much.